My name's Captain Bob Dobson. I'm the PSEO, the Permanent Staff Administration Officer of 33 Signal Squadron, based here in Alamein Barracks in Huyton in Knowsley. The barracks was built in 1956 for the Royal Tank Regiment, and it was called Alamein because of the connection with the Battle of Alamein and the Tank Regiment itself. And in our collection, we still have an original signature from Field Marshal Montgomery, who controlled that battle in Alamein. Prior to 1920, the Royal Engineers provided line communication throughout the army, and that was cables spread across the ground with telephones on either end. It was then realised that we needed a core of signals to provide this communication system. Communications were advancing, and we needed somebody who became the master of that. So in 1920, the Royal Corps of Signals were formed. Since 1920, there's an awful lot of technology that's taken place. At some point, the Royal Corps of Signals has had involvement with. One of the earliest examples of communications equipment I have in the collection here in Huyton is what we call a heliograph. Heliograph started to come into common use around the mid to late 1800s. This example dates back from the First World War. It's a very simple device to use. By pulsing the button on the back, you reflect the sun on or off to the receiver, therefore sending a message. It's recorded that on a good day with bright sunlight, a heliograph could communicate over 50 miles. And unless you were in the line of sight of the heliograph, nobody else could read that message. So the heliograph was the WhatsApp as of its time, because nobody else could read what you're saying unless you were in that group. One of the oldest pieces of technology I've got here is a telephone exchange from 1917. And it would bring 16 telephone lines into an exchange, where an exchange operator could then patch out each telephone line to another telephone in the field somewhere in Northern Europe. The biggest problem was the fact that the line would get cut and snapped. That was the problem. It only took a shell nearby to sever the lines, you've lost communications. And the line layers and cable layers of that time were particularly hardened men who knew if the line went, it was their responsibility to reconnect that line. When I joined the Army in 1975, this version of a telephone exchange had gone. It had been superseded by a newer version. But fundamentally, that newer version used exactly the same technology. I deployed to the first Gulf War from Germany, and we deployed a trunk system called Tarmigan. It provided digital communications on the ground. It broke down to a fax machine, a telephone system, a computer system, and a telegraph system, and was used until the mid-90s. This also was used in the first Gulf War. We were now taking it into the battlefield in a digital scenario. However, there was still a need to manually switch one caller coming in to another caller in the field. Exactly the same theory as the First World War telephone exchange. One of the major things I remember from the Gulf War is being able to make the telephone call back to my wife. Something I'd never done before. Suddenly I was in the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, about to start a war, but I could pick a telephone up and suddenly talk to my family. The ability to make that phone call home in the early 1990s from the middle of the desert was a huge leap in faith. One of the sad things about being in the Army so long is that those things that you trained on or with are now in museums. The system we used, Tarmigan, was effectively a mobile communication network. It would go in the back of a Land Rover and be driven around the battlefield, and people would be able to pick it up and dial a telephone number. Ultimately, the subsection of Tarmigan that we call single channel radio access produced the mobile phone that we use now. So our expertise goes from a line on the ground to a mobile phone and everything in between. Communications now is not so much about how you communicate or what you communicate, it's how you protect that communications. And the days of one-to-one sharing a conversation have gone. And the big push forward in the Royal Cross Signals for our next 50 to 100 years will be cyber warfare, i.e. warfare conducted over internet systems, computer-based systems, rather than a weapon or a tank in the battlefield. We've moved on again.